One of the most powerful sentences you can say to a narcissist is very simple, but psychologically it changes the entire dynamic. You look at them calmly, without anger, without trying to prove anything, and you say, "I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing this game anymore." Now on the surface, this sounds like a small statement. But on a deeper level, this sentence removes the very thing a narcissistic personality depends on to function, and that is unconscious participation. Narcissistic behavior survives on reactions. It survives on confusion, on self-doubt, on emotional engagement. As long as you are trying to defend yourself, explain yourself, or make them understand you, the game continues. And the moment the game continues, the power remains exactly where it has always been. You have to understand that disrespect from a narcissistic person is rarely random. It is not accidental, it is part of a pattern. Sometimes the pattern is subtle, sometimes it is obvious, but the goal is usually the same. They test how much they can say, how far they can go, how much control they can have over your emotional state. And most people, without realizing it, respond in ways that actually teach the narcissist that the behavior works. They argue, they defend, they over-explain, they try to be understood. From a psychological point of view, this is not weakness. This is a normal human response to feeling unseen or invalidated. We want connection. We want fairness. We want mutual respect. But when you are dealing with someone who is not operating from the same emotional framework, those normal responses become the very thing that keeps the cycle alive. When you say, "I see what you're doing," something shifts immediately. You are no longer inside the reaction. You are observing the pattern. And observation is powerful, because manipulation needs you to stay unconscious. It needs you to stay focused on the words, the tone, the argument of the moment, instead of seeing the structure behind it. The moment you name the pattern, even quietly, the dynamic changes. Not because the narcissist suddenly becomes self-aware, but because you are no longer available in the same way. The second part of the sentence is even more important. I'm not playing this game anymore. Notice the wording. You are not attacking them. You are not diagnosing them. You are not trying to win. You are simply withdrawing your participation. And psychologically, this is where real power begins. Narcissistic personalities often expect resistance because resistance keeps the interaction alive. What they do not expect is calm refusal. They do not expect someone who is steady enough to step out of the emotional tug of war completely. This does not mean the other person will suddenly respect you in that moment. In fact, sometimes the opposite happens at first. When the usual reactions stop, the behavior may intensify. There may be more criticism, more sarcasm, more attempts to provoke you. And this is where many people get pulled back in, because the nervous system wants relief from tension. We want the conflict to end, so we go back to explaining, defending, or trying to fix the situation. But the real shift happens when you stay grounded long enough for the pattern to lose its effect. From a deeper psychological perspective, what you are really saying in that moment is this: I am no longer willing to abandon myself just to keep this interaction comfortable. And that is a profound change, because many people who find themselves repeatedly disrespected have learned, often very early in life, to tolerate discomfort in order to maintain connection. They learn to stay in conversations where they feel small, to accept tones that feel wrong, to question their own perception just to avoid conflict. So when you calmly say, "I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing this game anymore," you are not only speaking to the other person, you are also speaking to the part of yourself that used to believe you had no choice. And the moment you truly see the game, you are no longer trapped inside it. Another sentence that has a very different kind of power is this one. You don't get access to me when you speak to me like that. And what makes this sentence so effective is that it shifts the focus away from trying to control the other person and brings the attention back to something you actually have authority over, which is access. Most people, when they feel disrespected, instinctively try to correct the behavior. They say things like, "Why are you talking to me like that?" Or, "You shouldn't treat me this way," or, "That's not fair." These responses are understandable, but psychologically they keep you in a position where you are asking the other person to change in order for you to feel okay. And when you are dealing with someone who is used to having emotional control in the relationship, that request often has very little effect. Narcissistic personalities, in particular, tend to respond more to consequences than to explanations. Not because they are incapable of understanding words, but because the dynamic they operate in is based on power, not mutual reflection. If nothing changes after the disrespect, the mind learns that the behavior is acceptable. It may not be consciously calculated every time, but the pattern becomes reinforced. This is why boundaries that exist only in your thoughts rarely protect you. A boundary becomes real only when it affects access. When you say, "You don't get access to me when you speak to me like that," you are not arguing about who is right. You are not trying to make them agree with your feelings. You are defining a condition for connection. And that is a very different psychological position. Connection becomes something that requires respect, not something that is given automatically no matter how you are treated. For many people, this is uncomfortable at first, because they were taught that love means tolerance, that closeness means staying even when something feels wrong, that being a good partner, friend, or family member means absorbing more than you should. But real respect does not grow in an environment where there are no limits. It is also important to understand that access is not only physical. Access means emotional availability, attention, time, energy, openness. When someone repeatedly disrespects you and you continue to give them the same level of access, the nervous system on both sides learns that nothing serious has happened. The words may sound strong, but the reality stays the same. And human beings, at a very basic level, respond more to what changes than to what is said. There is another layer to this that is often overlooked. Many people who struggle to set boundaries are not afraid of the other person's reaction as much as they are afraid of the distance that might follow. When you limit access, you risk conflict. You risk silence. You risk the possibility that the relationship may not continue in the same way. And for someone who has learned to equate connection with safety, that can feel threatening, even when the connection itself is painful. So the tendency is to keep the peace at the cost of self-respect. But over time, that cost becomes very heavy, because every moment of tolerated disrespect teaches your own mind that your limits are negotiable. This is why the tone of this sentence matters as much as the words. It is not said with anger, and it is not said as a punishment. It is said with clarity. You don't get access to me when you speak to me like that. There is no drama in it, no long explanation, no attempt to force understanding. Just a statement of reality. And when this kind of consistency is repeated, something begins to change. Sometimes the other person adjusts their behavior because the old pattern no longer works. Sometimes they resist because they were comfortable with the old pattern. Either way, the dynamic shifts because you are no longer participating in the same way. And the deeper truth behind this sentence is simple, but difficult for many people to live by. Access to you is not a right. It is something that exists only where respect is present. There is another sentence that can completely change the emotional balance between you and a narcissistic person, and it may be one of the hardest ones to say with sincerity. The sentence is this: I'm not here to prove my worth to you. On the surface, it sounds like confidence. But psychologically, it goes much deeper than confidence. It touches a very old pattern that many people carry without realizing it. The belief that in order to be treated well, they must first convince someone else that they deserve it. And when this belief exists, even quietly, it creates the perfect environment for repeated disrespect. If you look closely at many interactions with narcissistic personalities, you will notice that the conversation often turns into a subtle trial. Your decisions are questioned. Your feelings are minimized. Your intentions are doubted. Your character is challenged. Sometimes it is obvious. Sometimes it is disguised as jokes, advice, or criticism that sounds reasonable on the surface. But underneath, there is an unspoken message. You need to justify yourself here. You need to explain why you did what you did. You need to prove that your reaction makes sense. And the moment you step into that role, the dynamic shifts in a way that puts you at a disadvantage. From a psychological point of view, the need to prove yourself usually does not start in adult relationships. It often begins much earlier in life, in environments where acceptance felt conditional. Maybe you were praised when you performed well but ignored when you struggled. Maybe love felt available only when you were agreeable, helpful, or quiet. Maybe expressing anger or hurt led to rejection instead of understanding. In those situations, the nervous system learns something very powerful: connection must be earned. And once that belief is learned, it tends to repeat itself, even with people who are not capable of offering healthy connection in the first place. Narcissistic personalities often sense this pattern very quickly, sometimes without being consciously aware of it. They notice who feels the need to explain, who feels uncomfortable with disapproval, who tries hard to keep the interaction smooth, even when something feels wrong. And when that pattern is there, the relationship can easily turn into a cycle where one person keeps trying to demonstrate their value, while the other keeps raising the standard just enough to stay in control. This is why saying, "I'm not here to prove my worth to you," is not really about the other person. It is about breaking the internal habit of seeking permission to exist as you are. When you say this calmly, without arrogance, without hostility, you are stepping out of the invisible courtroom that the interaction has become. You are no longer the one on trial. You are simply a person who knows that dignity is not something that needs to be negotiated in every conversation. It is important to understand that this does not mean you never take responsibility. It does not mean you refuse feedback or that you believe you are always right. Psychological maturity includes the ability to reflect, to apologize, to grow. But there is a difference between self-reflection and self-justification. Reflection comes from strength. Justification comes from fear of losing connection. And narcissistic dynamics tend to feed on that fear, because as long as you are trying to secure approval, the balance of power remains uneven. When you stop proving yourself, something very interesting happens. At first, the other person may push harder. They may accuse you of being cold, arrogant, selfish, or difficult. This is often an attempt, conscious or not, to pull you back into the old role where you felt responsible for keeping the relationship comfortable. And this is the moment where many people give in, not because they agree, but because the discomfort of disapproval feels unbearable. But if you can stay grounded long enough, the pattern begins to lose its grip, because the game only works when you keep playing your part. At a deeper level, this sentence is an act of self-respect that does not require an audience. You are not declaring your worth to convince them. You are reminding yourself that your value does not rise or fall based on someone else's ability to see it. And the moment you truly stop trying to prove your worth, you make it impossible for anyone to use your self-doubt as a way to control you. There is another sentence that seems very simple, but it carries a kind of quiet authority that many people are not used to expressing. The sentence is this: "You can disagree with me, but you will not disrespect me." What makes this statement powerful is that it separates two things that often get mixed together in unhealthy dynamics. Disagreement is normal. Disrespect is not. In many relationships where narcissistic patterns exist, the line between those two disappears. Every difference of opinion turns into criticism, every discussion turns into a personal attack, and every attempt to explain yourself turns into a situation where you are made to feel small. Over time, the nervous system begins to expect that speaking honestly will lead to tension, so you start holding back, adjusting your words, or avoiding certain topics just to keep the peace. From a psychological perspective, this is how self-silencing develops. Not because you are weak, but because your mind learns that being open leads to discomfort, rejection, or conflict that never really gets resolved. And when this pattern repeats long enough, you may begin to accept disrespect, as if it is simply part of being close to someone. You tell yourself that this is how they are, that they don't mean it, that you are too sensitive, that every relationship has problems. All of those thoughts may contain some truth, but they can also become a way of normalizing something that slowly erodes your sense of self. Narcissistic personalities often blur the line between disagreement and disrespect because it gives them more control over the interaction. If every conversation turns into a test of your intelligence, your character, or your emotional stability, then you are always in a position where you feel the need to defend yourself. And the more you defend, the more the focus shifts away from the original issue and onto you. This is why many people walk away from these conversations feeling confused, exhausted, and unsure of what actually happened. The topic changes, the tone changes, the rules change, and you end up questioning your own perception. When you say, "You can disagree with me, but you will not disrespect me," you are restoring that missing line. You are making it clear that conflict itself is not the problem. Two people can see things differently. Two people can argue. Two people can even be upset with each other. But respect is the condition that allows a relationship to stay healthy, even when there is tension. Without that condition, every disagreement becomes an opportunity for one person to dominate the other emotionally. It is important to notice that this sentence is not aggressive. It is not an insult, and it is not a threat. It is a statement of standards. And standards are different from demands. A demand tries to force the other person to behave a certain way. A standard defines what you will and will not accept in your presence. This distinction matters because when you speak from standards, you are not trying to control them. You are taking responsibility for yourself. Many people struggle with this because they were taught that being calm means being passive, and that being respectful means tolerating behavior that hurts them. But real emotional maturity includes the ability to stay grounded while also being clear about limits. You do not need to raise your voice to show strength. In fact, the calmer the tone, the more difficult it becomes for the other person to pull you into the usual cycle of reaction and counterreaction. When this kind of boundary is expressed consistently, the dynamic begins to change. Sometimes the other person adjusts, because the old way of speaking no longer gets the same response. Sometimes they become irritated, because they are used to conversations where they have more freedom to cross the line. Either way, something important happens inside you. You stop measuring your worth by how smoothly the interaction goes, and you start measuring it by whether you stayed true to your own standards. At a deeper level, this sentence is not only about how someone talks to you. It is about what you are willing to participate in. Because the moment you accept disrespect in the name of keeping the relationship, you teach your own mind that your voice is negotiable. And the moment you calmly say, "You can disagree with me, but you will not disrespect me," you remind yourself that respect is not the reward for being perfect. It is the minimum condition for staying. There is another sentence that often creates a very strong reaction, not because it is loud or aggressive, but because it introduces something that many narcissistic dynamics try to avoid at all costs. The sentence is this: "If this continues, I will distance myself." What makes this sentence powerful is not the threat of leaving, but the reality behind it. In many unhealthy relationships, distance is never truly on the table. No matter how many arguments happen, no matter how much disrespect is felt, the connection continues in the same way. The conversations repeat, the apologies repeat, the promises repeat, but the structure stays the same. And when the structure never changes, the behavior rarely changes either. From a psychological point of view, people do not usually change because they are told to change. They change when the current pattern stops working for them. Narcissistic personalities, in particular, often rely on the assumption that the relationship will remain available no matter how they behave. This assumption may not always be conscious, but it is learned through repetition. If every conflict ends with you staying, explaining, forgiving, or trying again without anything actually shifting, the mind learns that there are no real consequences. And without consequences, there is very little motivation to reflect. This is why the ability to create distance is so important. Distance is not punishment. It is not revenge. It is a form of self-protection that allows you to step out of a dynamic that keeps hurting you. When you say, "If this continues, I will distance myself," you are not trying to control their behavior. You are describing what you will do to take care of yourself if the behavior does not change. And that difference matters because it keeps you grounded in responsibility for your own well-being instead of trying to manage someone else's personality. For many people, this is one of the hardest boundaries to hold because distance can feel like loss. Even when the relationship is painful, it is still familiar. The nervous system often prefers a familiar discomfort over an unfamiliar emptiness. This is why people stay longer than they want to, explain more than they should, and tolerate more than they ever thought they would. Not because they enjoy it, but because the idea of walking away activates a very deep fear of being alone, rejected, or misunderstood. These fears are human. They often come from early experiences where connection felt uncertain, and the mind learned to hold on tightly even when something didn't feel right. Narcissistic dynamics can intensify this fear, because they often include moments of closeness mixed with moments of criticism or distance. This inconsistency keeps you hoping that if you just say the right thing, or try a little harder, the good moments will stay. But hope without change can become a trap. And the only way out of that trap is the willingness to accept that connection without respect is not really connection at all. When you say this sentence calmly, without anger, without drama, it sends a very clear message to both the other person and to yourself. It says that your presence is not automatic. It says that being in your life requires a certain level of care. It also says that you are strong enough to tolerate the discomfort that may come with stepping back. And that strength is often what shifts the dynamic more than any argument ever could. Sometimes the other person will react by trying harder to pull you back in. Sometimes they will accuse you of overreacting, being cold, or giving up too easily. This is where many people doubt themselves because they want to be seen as reasonable, kind, understanding. But being understanding does not mean allowing yourself to be hurt repeatedly. Emotional maturity is not measured by how much you can endure. It is measured by how honestly you can respond to what is happening. At its core, this sentence is an act of self-respect expressed through action, not just words. You are no longer asking the other person to treat you better while staying in the same position. You are making it clear that the relationship itself depends on mutual respect. And the moment you are truly willing to create distance when respect is missing, you take away the one thing that makes ongoing disrespect possible. Your silent agreement to stay no matter what. The last sentence may be the quietest one, but in many ways it is the most important, because it does not depend on the other person changing at all. The sentence is this: I know my value, even if you pretend not to. When this is said with sincerity, not arrogance, not defensiveness, but with a grounded sense of self, something very fundamental shifts inside you. And that internal shift is often what makes the external behavior of a narcissistic person lose its power. In many disrespectful dynamics, the real struggle is not only about what the other person says or does. It is about the doubt that their behavior creates inside you. When someone repeatedly questions your feelings, minimizes your experiences, or treats you as if you are less important, the mind naturally starts looking for proof that you matter. You try to explain yourself more clearly. You try to show your intentions. You try to be more patient, more understanding, more reasonable. And without realizing it, your sense of worth slowly becomes tied to whether the other person acknowledges it. This is the point where the balance of power becomes very uneven, because the more you need them to see your value, the more control they have over how you feel. From a psychological perspective, this pattern often has very deep roots. Many people who find themselves repeatedly in relationships where they feel disrespected learned early in life that their value was not always reflected back to them in a consistent way. Maybe they were loved but not understood. Maybe they were provided for but not emotionally seen. Maybe approval came only when they achieved something, behaved a certain way, or avoided conflict. When this happens, the nervous system becomes highly sensitive to signs of rejection or disapproval, and the adult mind may keep trying to earn a kind of recognition that never felt secure in the first place. Narcissistic personalities often interact with this sensitivity in a way that keeps the cycle going. They may give attention one moment and withdraw it the next. They may praise you when you agree with them and criticize you when you don't. They may act as if your worth depends on their opinion, even if they never say that directly. And if you already carry some doubt about yourself, it becomes very easy to get pulled into the effort to prove that you deserve respect. The problem is that this effort rarely leads to real change, because the need to prove yourself keeps the other person in the position of judge. This is why the sentence, "I know my value, even if you pretend not to," is so powerful. You are no longer asking them to confirm who you are. You are not waiting for their approval to feel steady. You are recognizing that your worth exists, whether or not they are capable of seeing it. And that recognition removes the emotional leverage that disrespect depends on. It is important to understand that knowing your value does not mean thinking you are better than anyone else. It means you no longer accept the idea that your dignity can be decided in the middle of an argument. It means you can listen without collapsing, disagree without feeling guilty for existing, and walk away without feeling like you have lost yourself. This kind of self-respect is not loud. It does not need to prove anything. In fact, the more real it becomes, the less you feel the need to convince anyone at all. When you reach this point, the behavior of a narcissistic person may not change completely, but your experience of it changes dramatically. Their words no longer go as deep, their criticism no longer defines you, and their approval no longer feels like something you have to earn. And when that happens, the dynamic loses the tension that used to keep you trapped in it. At the deepest level, this sentence is not really spoken to them. It is spoken to yourself. It is a reminder that your worth is not created in someone else's mind, and it does not disappear when someone refuses to recognize it. And the moment you truly know your value, without needing them to admit it, you become impossible to control through disrespect.